The warning arrived at 4:17 local time, a shriek of data that crashed 17 monitoring stations simultaneously. Commander Zara Odiambo had been awake for 22 hours already, working alongside her systems analyst, a sharp-tongued young man named Tobias Fenwick, reviewing anomalies in the upper mesosphere. They had both thought the readings were sensor malfunctions. They had both been wrong. The ships appeared over 4 continents at once. Not one ship. Not a fleet. A ceiling of ships. Dark, enormous structures that moved with the quiet confidence of things that had never once been afraid. They blocked the sun over Nairobi for 11 minutes before the shadow shifted northward. In those 11 minutes, no one spoke inside the command center. Not Zara. Not Tobias. Not the 42 analysts, technicians, and military liaisons who stood frozen at their stations with their mouths slightly open. It was Tobias who finally moved. He walked to the primary display, tapped a sequence of commands, and brought up the global feed. Every major city on Earth had the same image. Pale light beneath massive hulls. Silence where there should have been panic. And silence, Zara knew, was far more frightening than screaming. "They are not firing," Tobias said. He sounded almost offended by this fact. "Not yet," Zara replied. The first transmission came 40 minutes later. Not through any standard communication channel. It bypassed every protocol, every firewall, every encrypted layer humanity had spent the last century building. It appeared directly on every screen, every device, every surface capable of displaying light. The message was in every major human language simultaneously. It was also, Zara would later note in her incident report, grammatically flawless. The message read, "Biological population of the third orbital body. You are hereby designated a Class 4 feral world. Your territorial sovereignty is dissolved. Compliance guarantees survival. Resistance guarantees termination. Integration timeline begins in 72 hours. That was all. No name. No species identification. No gesture toward negotiation. Tobias stared at the screen for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "Class 4 feral world. That is what they are calling us." Zara was already pulling up the communications array, reaching out to the Joint Global Defense Network. "I know what they called us," she said. "I want them to remember it too." On the other side of the planet, deep beneath the Ural Mountains, a weapons systems engineer named Dmitry Vaskov was reading the same message on a cracked secondary monitor while eating cold soup. He set the soup down. He was not angry. He was not afraid. He was, if anything, deeply curious. He had spent 31 years building things designed to end large threats. He had never been given a threat large enough to justify the full scope of what he had built. He picked up his secure line and called his director with a calm voice and a single sentence. "I believe," Dmitry Vaskov said, "that it is finally time to open the lower vaults." Above the city of Nairobi, above every city on Earth, the alien ships held their positions. They did not move. They did not communicate again. They simply waited, the way things wait when they have never once encountered a reason to hurry. 72 hours. That was the timeline they had given humanity. They had not asked whether humanity agreed with the timeline. That, Zara Odiambo would later tell the Galactic Council Tribunal, was their first mistake. Ambassador Salveth of the Quarren Collective had watched 31 planetary integrations in her 400-year career. They followed a pattern as reliable as orbital mechanics. A Class 4 world received the declaration. The population panicked. Scattered, disorganized resistance emerged. Within a week, the governing structures collapsed under the psychological pressure of knowing they had already lost. Within a month, integration was complete. Clean. Efficient. Entirely without drama. She was watching feed number 87 from the blue-green world called Earth when the pattern broke. Beside her, the delegate from the Marathi synthesis, a tall crystalline being who communicated through vibration, resonated in a tone that translated roughly as mild surprise. The delegate's name, as far as Salveth could render it in standard language, was Keth Toril. Keth Toril had watched even more integrations than Salveth. Keth Toril was also watching feed 87. The feed showed the humans responding to the 72-hour ultimatum. They were not panicking. They were not scattering. They were organizing. "The governing factions are not collapsing," Salveth said, more to herself than to Keth Toril. "They are combining." This was unusual. Class 4 worlds typically had dozens of competing power structures that spent the majority of their energy in conflict with each other. The Vorith Dominion, which had issued the integration order for Earth, had calculated precisely on this fragmentation. A divided species could not coordinate resistance. A divided species could only watch as each faction fell separately. But on feed 87, Solvith watched something she had not expected to see. The major human nation-states were opening communication channels with each other. Not formal diplomatic channels. Emergency military channels. The humans were not calling each other to argue about jurisdiction or ideology or historical grievance. They were sharing weapons data, technical specifications, targeting systems, infrastructure coordinates for the Vorith ships that now sat in low orbit. Kethtoril resonated again. The translation was, they have been at war with each other for centuries. They know each other's systems completely. Solvith understood immediately. The humans had not just been fighting wars. They had been, inadvertently, stress-testing their own defenses against the one opponent they knew best. Themselves? Every human weapon had been designed to defeat human countermeasures. Every human countermeasure had been designed to survive human weapons. The result was a species that had, in its endless internal conflict, accidentally built one of the most sophisticated military ecosystems in the sector. And now, for the first time in recorded history, all of that capability was being pointed in the same direction. The Vorith should be notified, Solvith said. The Vorith do not accept external advisories during integration operations, Kethtoril replied. Solvith looked at the feed. A young woman in a military uniform somewhere in East Africa was speaking to a room full of people with a focus that Solvith recognized as something close to cold joy. A man somewhere beneath a mountain range in the northern landmass was opening large vault doors in a facility that Solvith's scanners could not fully penetrate. In a coastal city in the eastern island chain, a civilian engineer with no military title whatsoever had just transmitted a 20-page document to 9 separate defense networks that was already causing consternation in the offices of 3 generals. The Vorith, Solvith said slowly, may be making an error. On the feeds, humanity continued to organize. Quietly. Quickly. With the practiced efficiency of a species that had been preparing for exactly this moment, even though it had never known the moment was coming. In the observation platform's main gallery, other council members were beginning to drift toward the screens. Some had not moved from their assigned stations in decades. They were moving now. Because what was happening on the third planet of an unremarkable star in Sector 14 was something that none of them had ever seen before. A Class 4 world was not panicking. A Class 4 world was getting ready. Dmitry Vaskov was not a man given to speeches. He had attended enough of them to know that words spent in dramatic declaration were words taken away from actual work. When he descended to the lower vaults at 5 in the morning with a security team of 4 and a steaming cup of black tea, he did not make a speech. He simply told his chief engineer, a precise woman named Una Hargreaves who had designed half of what was stored down here, to begin the activation sequence. Una did not ask why. She had read the alien transmission the same as everyone else. She had been expecting this call since the first anomalous mesosphere readings, 14 hours before the ships appeared. She had, in fact, already pre-staged the activation protocols. She handed Dmitry a tablet with the sequence loaded and said, "I estimated you would arrive at approximately this time. I took the liberty." Dmitry looked at the tablet. He looked at Una. "How long have you been awake?" 31 hours, she said. "I will sleep when the planet is defended." This was, Dmitry thought, a perfectly reasonable position. The lower vaults held things that no international treaty had ever officially acknowledged. This was not because they were secret. Everyone with sufficient clearance knew they existed. They were unacknowledged because, under normal circumstances, deploying them would have been catastrophically destabilizing. These were weapons designed for scenarios that every serious military planner had labeled improbable but not impossible. End-of-world scenarios. Extinction prevention scenarios. The kind of scenarios where the usual rules of proportional response became irrelevant because there was no proportional response to the end of everything. The aliens had not considered the possibility that any Class 4 world would have built for this contingency. As the vault doors opened, Zara Odiambo appeared on Dimitri's secure line from Nairobi. She had the same expression she always had, which was the expression of someone doing 3 calculations simultaneously while speaking to you about a 4th. "Vaskov, tell me the rail accelerators are what I think they are." "Larger," he said. "The resonance pulse array in chamber 7. Functional. Untested at full output but functional. Pause. Then, the gravity disruption lattice on sublevel 4. Tested once," Dmitry said. "In 2031. The test range is now a lake." Another pause, longer this time. "How many units?" 11 arrays. Each capable of independent targeting at low orbital range. He heard Zara exhale. Not with fear. With something closer to relief. The Vorath have 700 ships in low orbit, she said. According to the data we received from the Fenwick intercept, each ship has 3 gravity stabilization nodes. Without those nodes, the ships lose structural cohesion in high-acceleration maneuvers. Dmitry Vaskov looked at his 11 gravity disruption arrays and did the mathematics very quickly. What is the Fenwick intercept? Tobias hacked their communication array 40 minutes ago. He is 26 years old and has been doing this type of thing since he was 14. I did not ask how. Dmitry approved of not asking how. He approved very strongly of having the answer. How long until they initiate integration? 41 hours, Zara said. That is how long we have to coordinate a simultaneous response across every theater. It is enough time. I know, she said. Meanwhile, in an oceanographic research vessel in the South Pacific, a civilian named Dr. Amara Yaboa, who officially studied deep-sea thermal vents, had just received a message from a government office she was not supposed to know existed. The message asked whether the low-frequency acoustic resonance system she had spent 8 years developing for deep water pressure mapping might, theoretically, produce a signal capable of disrupting electronic systems at high altitude. Dr. Yaboa replied within 4 minutes. Her reply included 3 schematics, a targeting calibration guide, and a note that said, I designed it to also do this. I just did not know when to mention it. Humanity, it turned out, had been quietly preparing for things it could not name for a very long time. It was Solvith who finally broke protocol. She had watched the council debate for 19 hours. The Quarren Collective was technically neutral in Vorath expansion operations, as was every member state of the council in matters of unaffiliated world integration. The rules were clear. Interference in a declared integration was a violation of the Varanix Accords, the foundational document of the entire council structure. No member state had broken those accords in 240 years. Solvith broke them anyway. She did not transmit to the Vorath. She had already predicted, correctly, that the Vorath would ignore any advisory. She transmitted to Earth. Specifically, she transmitted to the command center in Nairobi, because after watching hundreds of hours of Earth feeds, she had determined that Commander Zara Odiambo was the individual most likely to know what to do with the information she was about to provide. The transmission contained 3 things. First, a complete technical breakdown of Vorath ship architecture, including the location and vulnerability profile of every major system. Second, a translated excerpt from the Vorath Operational Manual for Integration Procedures, including their standard response protocols when facing unexpected resistance. Third, and most unusually, a personal note from Solvith herself. The note read, I am violating significant legal agreements by sending this. I am doing so because I have watched your species for the past 40 hours and I believe something important is about to happen. I want it recorded that I saw it coming and I helped. I ask nothing in return except that you survive. Your survival will be educational for everyone. Zara received the transmission at 3:42 and spent 4 minutes reading it in silence. Then she forwarded the technical breakdown to Dmitry and the Vorath response protocols to a strategy team in Geneva led by a retired general named Esperanza Calawavris, who had spent her career gaming exactly these kinds of asymmetric scenarios. Then she composed a reply to Solvith. Received and understood. We will survive. When this is over, I would like to speak with you about what comes next. I have questions about the council that I suspect are going to become relevant. Solvith received the reply and experienced something she had not felt in a very long time, which was hope in a direction she had not expected. Back in the council gallery, Keth Toril had noticed Solvith's transmission breach. The crystalline delegate resonated a question that translated as, you know what this will cost you. I know what it costs not to act, Solvith replied. Other delegates had gathered now. The integration countdown was at 33 hours. The Vorath fleet remained in position, silent and certain. On the feeds, the humans were running what appeared to be synchronized tests across multiple weapon systems, a level of cross-continental coordination the Council's own analysts had declared impossible for a Class 4 world 6 days ago. Delegate Farron of the Ossic Federation, who had not spoken in the Council chambers in 11 years, turned to the group and said in a voice like scraping stone, I have seen integration operations fail before. Twice in my career. Both times, the target world had a single advantage the Vorath had failed to account for. One had a natural electromagnetic environment that disrupted Vorath navigation. One had a biological defense agent they had not catalogued. And this world? Someone asked. Farron watched the feeds. Watched Zara Odiambo coordinating across 6 continents simultaneously. Watched Dmitry Vaskov's vault doors open wider. Watched a civilian oceanographer sending targeting equations to a military command she had never formally been part of. Watched a 26-year-old analyst still inside the Vorath communication network, pulling data no outsider had ever accessed. This world, Farron said, has all of the above. Plus something I have never seen before. What is that? Each other, Farron said. They are using each other. Every strength from every corner, combined. They are less afraid of the invaders than they are committed to the outcome. The gallery was quiet. On the feeds, humanity prepared. Esperanza Callaway-Vries had always believed that the most dangerous moment in any conflict was the moment the enemy believed the outcome was already decided. Certainty made organisms slow. It made them stop watching. It made them settle into the rhythm of a conclusion rather than remaining alert to the possibility of a reversal. The Vorath were certain. She had read the integration manual excerpt that Solveth had provided. She had shared it with her team in Geneva, a mix of strategists, physicists, engineers, and one philosopher of conflict theory named Ronan Cliff who had been included, he said, because someone needed to think about what happened after. The manual was blunt and thorough. Vorath integration operations had succeeded 317 times. They had failed 0 times. The manual did not include a contingency section because, according to Vorath operational doctrine, contingencies implied the possibility of failure, and acknowledging that possibility was considered a form of tactical weakness. They have no contingency planning, Ronan Cliff said when he read this. Correct, said Esperanza. They have never needed to plan for failure because they have never failed. Correct. So when we fail to fail, Ronan said carefully, they will not know what to do. Esperanza looked at her countdown. 29 minutes to the integration initiation window. That is the theory. The plan was coordinated to the second. Zara had spent 38 hours building the sequencing. Dmitri had spent those same hours pre-firing his gravity disruption arrays to operating temperature without activating them. Dr. Amara Yaboa had repositioned her research vessel to an optimal acoustic resonance point in the South Pacific and was now sitting in her operations cabin drinking tea and waiting. Tobias Fenwick had embedded a logic interrupt in the Vorath communication network that would, at the chosen moment, create a 17-second blackout across all intership coordination channels. 17 seconds was not long. But it did not need to be. At 19 minutes remaining, the first Vorath ships began descending from holding altitude. This was the initiation sequence. Ground teams. Compliance enforcement. The assumption of surrender. They did not know about the rail accelerators. They did not know about the acoustic resonance array. They did not know about the gravity disruption lattice. They did not know about Tobias Fenwick. They did not know about Una Hargreaves, who had spent the last 4 hours writing a targeting script of such quiet elegance that Dmitri had stared at it for 2 full minutes before he said, simply, "This is art." At 12 minutes remaining, Zara gave the first signal. The South Pacific lit up with low-frequency acoustic pulses that climbed through the atmosphere and struck the descending Vorath ships like a hand closing around fragile machinery. Electronic systems stuttered. Navigation arrays flickered. The descent slowed. At 10 minutes, Tobias activated his interrupt. 17 seconds of silence across every Vorath coordination channel. The descending ships, cut off from the fleet, received no instructions. They held position, waiting for a signal that was not coming. At 9 minutes and 40 seconds, Dimitri's 11 arrays fired. The gravity disruption field did not destroy the ships. It did not need to. It found the 3 stabilization nodes on each vessel, exactly where the Vorath schematic said they would be, and it pushed. Not catastrophically. Just enough. Just enough to make controlled flight in an atmosphere deeply uncomfortable. Just enough to make 17 ships make emergency corrections that took them out of the descent pattern and into chaotic holding positions. At 9 minutes, the rail accelerators launched. The Vorath had shields. Good shields. Shields that had absorbed every weapon any Class 4 world had ever thrown at them. The rail accelerators were not firing conventional projectiles. Una had made modifications. The projectiles were small, dense, and targeted not the ship bodies but the shield generation emitters. Small. Precise. 11 hits on 11 emitters. 11 Vorath ships with suddenly irregular shielding. The remaining fleet, still cut off for 4 more seconds, could not respond. When Tobias's interrupt ended and the communication channels reopened, the Vorath Fleet Command received a battlefield report that its operational doctrine contained no framework to interpret. Ships out of position. Shield systems compromised. Electronic arrays disrupted across 3 descent vectors. Ground operations stalled. No compliance indicators from the surface. The Fleet Command did what 317 successful integrations had never prepared it to do. It hesitated. That hesitation lasted 9 minutes. In those 9 minutes, the entire second phase of the human response deployed. Fleet Prime Gorvok had received bad news before. He had received it 3 times in his career, all minor operational complications that had resolved within hours. He had never received news like this. His staff was presenting data that his instrumentation was collecting correctly, but his cognitive training had no category for. Clarify, he said. His tactical coordinator, a young officer named Veth who had transferred to this operation from the Meridian sector, was doing her best to clarify something that resisted clarification. The surface population has initiated simultaneous coordinated resistance across 19 separate strike vectors, she said. The coordination level exceeds our projected maximum for a Class 4 designation by a factor of 11. That is not possible, Gorvok said. It is occurring, Veth said. He looked at the damage reports. Not catastrophic. The humans had not destroyed his fleet. They had not even come close to destroying his fleet. What they had done was far more troubling. They had demonstrated knowledge of Vorath ship architecture that should not exist. They had deployed technology whose existence the pre-integration survey had not detected. And they had coordinated this response across an entire planet in under 40 hours, which the classification model said required a minimum of 300. Where did they get our schematics? Gorvok asked. No one answered. The question hung in the command chamber like something with weight. Veth, who had been running secondary analysis, said carefully, Fleet Prime, I am detecting an anomalous signal embedded in our communication network. It appears to have been there for approximately 38 hours. It is currently dormant, but its architecture suggests it was used to extract data from our coordination channels. Gorvok stared at her. Someone was inside our communication network. A surface-based intelligence agent, yes. I believe so. For 38 hours. Yes, Fleet Prime. The silence in the command chamber was of a specific quality that Gorvok recognized because he had once heard it during a training exercise where a simulation had produced an impossible outcome. It was the silence of competent people confronting something outside the model. He was still sitting in that silence when the second message arrived from the surface. Not a transmission through standard channels. Through his personal command interface, the same way the integration declaration had been delivered globally. Someone down there had, apparently, reverse-engineered his personal command interface and was now using it to send him a message. The message was from Commander Zara Odiambo. Read. Fleet Prime. You have approximately 40 minutes before the second phase of our response reaches full deployment. I'm not going to describe the second phase. You have already seen what we prepared in the first phase without any advance warning. Please consider what we prepared when we had time to plan properly. I'm offering you the opportunity to withdraw. Not because I doubt our ability to continue. Because I was educated as an engineer before I was a soldier, and I was taught that destroying something functional is wasteful if there is an alternative. You are functional. Your fleet is functional. Take it somewhere else. Gorvok read the message 3 times. Then he pulled up 317 integration records and searched for any instance of a target world having offered terms to a Vorath fleet. He found none. On the Galactic Council observation platform, Salveth watched the Vorath command vessel's power signature shift. Not an attack configuration. She knew attack configurations. This was something else. Something she had to reference in her memory for a long time before she found the category. Withdrawal preparation. Kethtoril resonated beside her. The translation was, they are leaving. Yes, Salveth said. 317 successful integrations, Kethtoril said. 317, Salveth agreed. On the feeds, across every city on Earth, people had come out of shelters and buildings and basements to watch the shapes in the sky. The enormous dark hulls that had blocked the sun were moving, slowly, then faster, rising from low orbit into the higher bands, then higher still, then gone. The sky above Nairobi was clear. Tobias Fenwick sat in the command center eating a sandwich he had made 6 hours ago and never had a chance to eat. He watched the last Vorath ship leave the sensor range and then he looked at Zara and said, Do you think they will come back? No, she said. You sound certain. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I think they went home to report something that their model had no category for. And I think that report is going to travel much farther than we expect. She was right. But neither of them knew yet just how far it would travel, or who else would be watching when it arrived. The session had been called with less than 48 hours of notice, which in council terms was essentially instantaneous. Members who had not spoken on the floor in decades were present. Species who typically sent automated diplomatic proxies had sent living representatives. Salvith of the Quarren Collective stood at the center podium and did not feel the weight of her treaty violation hanging over her the way she had expected to. She felt, instead, a peculiar lightness. Zara Odiambo was present as well. She had been transported to Varanix 7 via a Quarren diplomatic vessel, which technically constituted another Accord violation, but no one was raising procedural objections today. She sat beside Tobias Fenwick, who was studying the architecture of the council chamber with the expression of someone who was going to understand how it worked before he left. Beside them sat Esperanza Callaway-Vries, Dmitry Vaskov, Una Hargreaves, and Dr. Amara Yaboa, 6 humans sitting in a chamber that had never hosted a Class 4 world delegation before. Ronan Cliff had come too. Someone needed to think about what came next. Salvith began her address. I stand before this body having violated the Varanix Accords. I transmitted restricted intelligence to an unaffiliated world during an active integration operation. I did this because I was watching something I had not seen before and I believed it was important. I submit my judgment to this council. But before any determination is made, I ask that you watch what I watched. 40 hours of an unremarkable Class 4 world doing something remarkable. The council watched. They watched Zara coordinate across 6 continents in real time. They watched Dimitri's vault doors open on technology that should not have existed. They watched Tobias sit alone in a monitoring room and pry open the communication infrastructure of a spacefaring civilization with equipment that had cost, according to the records Tobias had subsequently submitted, less than the price of a small vehicle. They watched Una write targeting code that 3 council weapons analysts, reviewing it afterward, called elegant. They watched Amara calmly transmit an acoustic targeting solution from a research boat in the middle of an ocean while her official function was studying geological vents. They watched Gorvok's fleet leave. Then Salvith said, I was asked afterward why I helped. I've thought about this. My answer is this: I did not help them win. They were going to win. I helped myself understand what was happening quickly enough to have done something useful. I could not watch this and remain a neutral observer. I do not believe any of you could have either. The chamber was quiet. Delegate Farron of the Ossic Federation, who had spoken twice in 11 years and was now about to speak a 3rd time, rose and said, The question before this council is not whether the Accords were violated. They were. The question is what we do with what we have witnessed. I propose a formal reclassification. The motion passed without debate. Earth was reclassified. Not to Class 3. Not to Class 2. The council created a new designation, one that had not existed before. The record described it as Class Exceptional, defined as a world that had demonstrated, under existential pressure and without prior contact with spacefaring civilization, coordination capacity, technological depth, adaptive response, and operational creativity exceeding all standard classification parameters. When Zara was told about the reclassification, she asked what it meant in practical terms. Salvith explained that it meant Earth would be offered full council membership, trade access, diplomatic protections, and the opportunity to participate in the governance of a community of several thousand spacefaring civilizations. Zara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, We will have questions about council governance. Many questions. We noticed some structural inefficiencies during the crisis. Salvith smiled, which was unusual for a Quarren. I expected nothing less. Ronan Cliff, sitting near the back of the delegation room, was already writing. He had been writing since they arrived, filling pages with observations about council architecture, communication protocols, and political structure. He was doing this because Zara had told him on the voyage here that whatever came next would require understanding the system they were entering. He agreed. Understanding a system was the first step to improving it. Tobias Fenwick, for his part, had already found the council's network infrastructure access point. He had not done anything with this information. He had simply located it, verified that he could, and then left it alone. For now. Una Hargreaves sat in the chamber looking at the technological specifications that the council had offered to share as a gesture of welcome. She read through them carefully. Then she wrote 3 notes in the margins and handed them to Dmitry, who read them and made a face that was not quite a smile and not quite alarm. You found a vulnerability in their standard shield design, he said. 2, she said. The 3rd note is about their propulsion array. It is not a vulnerability. It is just something they are doing inefficiently, and I believe I know a better approach. Dmitry looked at the 3 notes. He looked at the enormous council chamber full of ancient civilizations and species that had been crossing the stars since before humanity had discovered agriculture. He looked back at Yuna. Perhaps, he said carefully, we keep those to ourselves for the moment. Of course, Yuna agreed. I just wanted to know that we had noticed. Outside, through the observation port of Varanix 7, 1,000 stars were visible. Among them, one yellow star a little unremarkable in its position in the outer band of an average spiral galaxy. Around that star, the third world. Green. Alive with something that the Galactic Council had, until 3 months ago, called feral. Zara stood at the observation port and looked at that star for a long time. Then she turned back to the chamber because there was work to do. There was always work to do. And humanity, as 317 failed integration attempts could confirm, was very good at work. The council watched her return to her seat with the particular attention of very old beings encountering something new. Something they would be thinking about for a long time. Something that had changed the shape of what they thought possible. Humanity had been given 72 hours to comply. It had done something else instead. And the stars, for the first time in a long time, felt a little less certain about what they contained.